All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everybody. It is so nice to have you all here today. My name is Mary Pelletier, and I am an education, affordability, and financial wellness counselor over at the Finance Authority of Maine. I serve counties Cumberland, Franklin, and Lincoln. So if you are joining and you work for a school or organization in any of those counties, you probably have heard from me already this year or will be hearing from me. And with me today is Education Affordability Content and Training Manager Mila Tappan. She is my wing person today. She is going to monitor the chat for me. If there are any questions or comments along the way, I highly encourage you all to utilize that chat feature to put those there, and Milo will make sure that I don't miss any along the way. So this session is recorded, and you are welcome to, drop off early if you need to, or, you can always revisit this recording at a later date if you want to review anything that we talk about. But just so you know that that will be there. Okay, so we are going to be talking about financial aid offers today. And let's take a look at our agenda. So we're gonna, it's almost Valentine's Day. We're gonna give a little love to financial aid offers and really try to understand them and how it fits into the financial aid process. Um, we're going to talk about the financial aid process as a whole and what students should expect by this time of year. A lot of them are in the process where they put applying to schools is kind of behind them, and now they need to make some really big decisions. And one of those decisions is will the one of the factors to those decisions, of course, is going to be how much each school they have applied to will cost them. And so understanding that is paramount. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to look at net price versus sticker price. And so understanding the difference versus net price and sticker price so that students really have a holistic picture of the cost of attendance for them. Next, we're going to talk about financial need. So each school has a different way to determine well, they have factors that they use to determine financial need, and then they have their own ways of trying to fill that need. Some schools are better at it than others. And then next, we're going to review some financial aid offers. We're going to look at actual financial aid offers from actual schools because they don't all look the same. And sometimes some schools are better at communicating that information than others. And so taking a look at actual financial aid offers so that you can parse out the information it's trying to tell you, it will help that yourself and your students understand, okay, what exactly am I being offered here? And FAME has some resources to help you do that. You're not doing it alone, and so we're going to point out some really great tools available to you that you can use to do that. And then after that process is behind you and your students, and you understand what each school has for a financial aid package, a lot of families are going to find that there is a gap, and that's just a reality for many families. And we have some solutions or some pointers for paying the rest of the balance and how to go about doing that. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about some special circumstances and appeals. We're going to talk about what family circumstances are out there that might make a student a good candidate for an appeal, and also some tools to help you do that if it's something the student wants to go forward with. Okay. All right. So, like I said, we're going to talk about the financial aid process. Here is a little roadmap for us to look at. And many of you on this call are familiar with this process, and a lot of your students are well into this process. But we're going to just quickly go over it and start by saying if you have students that are, let's say jumping on this bandwagon a little late, that is totally okay. And it is not, this opportunity to go to school this year and apply for financial aid has not left them. It is still an option available to them. Um, the the first step for them, as with students that have already done this, is to create their studentaid.gov account, or formerly known as the FSAID. And I'll just call out quickly here that, if your students are creating a studentaid.gov account, it's very important that they use a personal email, not their school email, because this will be something that carries with them all through their college going years and beyond. So, like for instance, myself, I have been out of college for, oh my gosh, almost 10 years now. That's crazy. And I still use my same studentaid.gov account to keep track of my student loans and my public service loan forgiveness. So, making sure students are aware that that is something that they're going to carry with them, make sure that they keep, their records, in a good place for them to refer back to. Okay. So after they create their student.gov account, we hope that they file the FAFSA and they apply to those colleges. The FAFSA data and their student aid index or SAI is then sent to the schools that they have listed. And students can go back and list more schools. So if they are not happy with their financial aid offers from the schools they applied for, let's say they want to add a few more safety schools, they can go back and add more if they choose to. And then once accepted, they're going to see their financial aid packages coming in. Okay. And then looking ahead here, um, a lot of your students are right at that red square where they are taking in that information from the schools they've been accepted to and comparing some financial aid offers. It's important to know that schools communicate this information in several different ways. So there are some schools that are sending a paper financial aid offer that, to the student's address. And this is can be more typical for students that are just now enrolling from, they're not students that are already enrolled and in their second or third year. But they're, as they continue on in their education, if they apply to a school and they decide to actually enroll in that school, the subsequent years they might see maybe a virtual or an email financial aid offer or maybe something on their student portal. But we are seeing more and more that schools are just jumping directly to the digital financial aid offer. So they might see an email in their inbox, or maybe even, hopefully not their junk folder, but it could happen, where the school sends them their financial aid offer digitally, and they might just skip the paper form altogether. So, remind students to be watching for that if they've applied for schools and they haven't heard back from them yet. Do, do, do. After that, the student is going to have to make a choice on which school they go to and accept financial aid. A lot, that's a process they have to manually go in and actually accept financial aid to the school that they choose to go to be able to accept it. And then after the aid has been processed and applied to that year's bill, it's important to know that students are going to have to do it again next year. So filing the FAFSA yet again, so that they're still eligible for financial aid and can continue to receive that in the years after. All right. So next up, let's talk about net price versus sticker price. One of the major ways to determine the affordability of any particular school is determining something called the net price of that school. And that's where the financial aid offer comes into play. So this financial aid offer is going to give insight on how much the school, the actual cost of the school will be. And compare that to something like the sticker price. The sticker price or the cost of attendance is what is publicly listed on the school's website or other areas of how much it costs for them to go there. So, UMaine, University of Maine Orono might say it costs us X amount of dollars for one semester of tuition and one semester of living on campus. After the student files the FAFSA and applies for financial aid, they're going to be offered financial aid, and you would then subtract things like grants, scholarships, tuition waivers, and other gift aid from that cost of attendance, and then they get their net price. And obviously, this is going to be very important for students because that price is going to be different dependent on a lot of factors, if they're eligible for scholarships, if they're eligible for need-based aid, such as Pell Grants and other types of need-based aid. And so the net price is truly what the number is that they're going to want to know when they're deciding how much a school is going to cost and if they can afford it. So schools, when they are figuring out how to determine how much financial aid to give each student, they need to figure out the financial need of each individual student. And so the way that schools do that is they take their cost of attendance, and again, that's going to vary by school, and the SAI, the student aid index that the student will have calculated by filing the FAFSA. They will subtract that by the cost of attendance and come up with the financial need. So schools are going to do their very best to fill that need for each student. And again, some schools do this better than others. And we always recommend that students do their homework on schools. Big Future, the website has a really great search engine where you can look up a school and see how much is they typically offer for financial aid and how much need they meet. So, for instance, there are three schools in the state of Maine that meet full financial need: Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. Those schools have large endowments and they are have the ability to meet that full need, but they're also very selective. And so there are some schools that have that ability to do so, but most schools there will still be some gap. All right, so now's a good time to pause. I see some questions already in the chat, so I'll have Mila read those out. And if you have anything else to add, Mila, that I've missed, please uh, include that too.
Yeah, so the first one, Mary, was just that someone asked about if students could wait to accept their loans. So maybe they don't know how much they need to borrow because they might be waiting to see what they get for scholarships. And yes, absolutely, they can wait to accept their loans. The other thing they can always do is return their loans. So let's say, for example, a student borrows their loans, but then maybe at Christmas they get this great gift from their family member and they realize they didn't need to borrow as much loan. They can actually return some of that loans. They just work with the school and do that. So we don't want students to ever borrow more than they need to. They can return loans, and not borrowing loans does not negatively impact their other financial aid eligibility. Um, let's see. Does the SAI change each year when the FAFSA is completed again? Mary?
Yes, so the SAI there is many different factors that will contribute to what the SAI for that student will be. And a large contributing factor is going to be family income. So a lot of times that changes from year to year. If your income, if hopefully you get a raise from your workplace every year. And if so, that will change how much your annual gross income will be. Or on the other side of that coin, if there is a loss of income for some reason, that's going to have an impact on the student's SAI. And so that is why it's really important that the student files their FAFSA every year so that that number is accurate, because that school is going to want the most up-to-date information every time they give out financial aid each year.
Exactly. And then the last question we have for the moment, Mary, is could you please talk about the impact of a full course load versus reduced course load and how that impacts financial aid eligibility? So I'll take that one if you want, if
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
okay.
thank you.
So when a student takes a reduced course load, they do need to be prepared, excuse me, for an adjustment to their financial aid eligibility. So like a Pell Grant specifically is based on the level of enrollment. So if you are taking 6 credits, that's considered, 50% of enrollment. Full time is typically 12 credits, so you would only get half of the amount of Pell Grant. Going forward, starting with the upcoming year, loans are also going to be prorated based on the level of enrollment. Additionally, a school may simply reduce their cost of attendance. So a minute ago, Mary talked about cost of attendance. And so if that is lower, that could impact other financial aid as well. So the best advice is for students who are looking at taking a reduced course load is to work with their school specifically as early as possible, have that conversation with them so that they understand the potential impact of taking fewer classes.
Great. Awesome questions so far. Thank you guys. Please continue to put those in the chat for Mila to catch as we go along. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some financial aid offers here. And these are real financial aid offers. We have students that very graciously will send us their financial aid offers so that we have an idea of what schools are sending. And so if that's you, if you have a student that is willing to share their financial aid offer with their personal information redacted, we don't want to share anyone's personal information. But if they're willing to share what it looks like and how, perhaps what or aid they're awarded, it really helps us because then we can kind of get our hands around what the students are actually seeing. So we have three financial aid offers here, from University of Southern Maine, University of Maine Orono, and then, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, no, I've had that backwards. University of Maine Orono, um, looks like Hudson University, and then that Northern Maine Community College. Text is a little blurry for me. Um, and then the information on these can vary wildly, and some schools might break down elements like gift aid into grants and scholarships, or it might look something have a different name. And some might have explanations on what type of aid that they're referring to and the difference, and some might not. Um, and so, just think about someone who's doing this process for the first time and how confusing that can be and how hard it is to navigate. So, it really is important to understand the different elements to look for on the financial aid award and how to parse through that information. So you're going to see three major components to all of these. The first is the gift aid, which I've talked about already, those grants and scholarships that are awarded if the student is eligible. Next, you're going to see loans, the federal student loans the student is eligible for. And then lastly, you're going to see work study if that applies. And so even looking at the middle one, Northern Maine, loans and work study are together, for example. And we'll talk a little bit more about some other differences between the three of these right now. So here's the Northern Maine one. So the key pieces that you should see, again, is that gift aid, sometimes referred to as self-help aid, and then, oh, I'm sorry, gift aid versus self-help aid, such as loans and work study. And then there might be some other funding that you see on the bottom there that might be outside of those. The direct cost from the school is that what's being billed to them. So again, the tuition, maybe cost for room and board, things like that. Indirect costs are estimates of things that might be on the horizon for them as expenses. So transportation is one of them. Other like food and other costs that come along with going to school. And so it gives the student a really clear picture on what to expect as far as overall expenses. And so on this one in particular, it adds those together for the student so that they get an idea. And then it also calls out their net cost. So the net cost is going to be those indirect and direct costs added together minus the gift aid, grants, and scholarships that they're awarded. So I love this one because it gives that part there, and then if the student chooses, they can look into what kind of loans they're eligible for to continue to knock off that overall net cost for them. Okay. So this is the University of Maine Orono Award here. So in addition to all of what we just talked about with the gift aid, and in this one in particular, it actually separates scholarships versus grants, and it talks about how much per year the student is eligible for scholarships in particular. This one is not, the student is not eligible for any grants, but they're eligible for scholarships. It talks about their net price and how much per year to expect to pay for school. But to really point down here on the bottom to the other options, after it goes through the, money that doesn't have to be paid back, plus the federal loans, it gives you some ideas on how to pay the remainder of that bill. Calls out tuition plans, the Parent Plus loan that some students or some families can use to pay the bill, and then private loans as well. And on here, it also it looks like this student is not eligible for study, but it does call out that section separately as well. Okay, make sure I'm not going to miss anything here. All right. And then last but not least, we have Husson here. So on Husson's award, grants and scholarships are grouped together. It includes some merit aid. Net price is listed, but keep in mind this student is off campus, and so the this award does not include to room and board. Um, and also, it provides some more information on work study. So, work study is a really great program. It's able to provide students with a job where they can work on campus. A lot of times, getting a job that might be connected to their area of study, which is great. And it's guaranteed hours that they can work for and receive up to the limit that they're awarded for work study. But it's important to know that that work study is not going to be available to them to pay that first semester bill because they haven't yet worked those hours. And so, while it is a part of their financial aid package and it's funds that are available to them if are going to utilize those working hours, they need to find other means to pay that first semester bill. And a lot of times, work study is really great for, the most miscellaneous expenses that come up, like their gas money or paying for laundry, things like that. The last thing I'll add about all of these offers, Mila had touched on this as well, but when you apply for financial aid, the school is making certain assumptions based on how you applied. So things like, are you a full-time student or a part-time student? Are you living on or off campus? All of that is going to be a part of how they are calculating that student's particular need. So if things change, if they were, let's say, part-time, but now they want to be full-time, they need to reach out to the financial aid office and rectify that information so that they might be eligible for more or less aid based on these circumstances, and they have to let the school know. Okay,
Mary, if you
let's
don't
just,
mind,
if you
if
don't
I
mind,
just
of course,
jump in.
jump right
Yeah, I
in.
just wanted to jump in real quick because there was a question that I do think comes up sometimes, and it had to do with what happens if a student doesn't do well academically? Do they risk
Mm,
their financial aid eligibility? And so, what I shared back in the Q&A was just that, if a student just doesn't do super well, so they don't get A's and B's, maybe they're getting C's and an occasional D, they're usually going to be fine. The key is to check
hmm
with the financial aid office and understand the policy. Usually, a student who's got over a 2.0 is going to be fine and can maintain their eligibility because the financial aid from the financial aid office is based on need, the family's financial situation, and doesn't vary based on a student having a C average versus an A average. That said,
Yeah,
there is a policy called satisfactory academic progress. So students do need to be making progress towards a degree. And if they are really not doing well, they can potentially lose their financial aid eligibility. So they do want to be aware of that policy. But we're not talking about someone who's, just not killing it. It's usually really,
yeah,
really struggling academically. And last but not least, if they have a merit scholarship that was awarded by the admissions office, those merit scholarships are usually renewable from one year to the next, unlike regular need-based aid where you have to do your FAFSA every year. But a merit scholarship often has a requirement that a student have a certain GPA in order to maintain that. And that GPA can be much higher. It might be a 2.5, it might be a 2.75, it could even be over a 3.0. So it's really important for students to understand at their school that they're attending what the rules are because that will vary by school.
Yes, I'll use a real life example. I was just looking at Thomas College in their merit-based scholarships that they offer, and the first year that you apply for those scholarships, some of them are very high, right? Like looking for a 3.75 to a 4.0 in some circumstances, for a certain level of merit aid. But then the following year, it actually drops because most schools understand that like leveling up from high school to college is an adjustment. Not you might not always be able to maintain the same performance that when you're acclimating to that kind of adjustment. So with Thomas in particular, it started out 3.75 to 4.0, but then the following year to keep that same level of merit aid, it was around like a 2.75, maybe slightly higher, but it wasn't that full 4.0. So that's an important piece with outside scholarships as well. Like if it's a renewable outside scholarship, being aware of the terms that you're agreeing to when you accept this aid. Do they want you to maintain a 3.5 for every single year? And is that going to be doable for you, or do you think that you might perhaps not be eligible for a scholarship in following years while you're adjusting? It all depends. But this is a good, I'm glad that question came out because I don't think I fully flushed out merit aid versus need aid, and I want to call that out really quickly. And Hassan happens to have a little bit of both, which I think is a good example. And the print is small, I apologize, but I'm going to point it out for you anyway. So merit aid is usually awarded to students for their performance in school. So your grades, or perhaps maybe you are doing a lot of community service hours. It's more about who the student is and how they are as a student. And so, of course, that's subject to certain changes, right? Like I just talked about, like you might have to maintain a certain GPA to keep getting it, things like that. Need-based aid, however, is really based on the financial picture. And so things like the federal Pell Grant is going to be based on the student's SAI and the family's financial situation. And, regardless of how the student is performing outside of the circumstances Mila talked about, they're going to keep getting that Pell Grant every year if the financial situation stays the same. And then I'm actually going to ask Mila to talk about FSEOG just a little bit, how it's different from the Pell Grant. And some schools have that type of aid and some don't.
Sure. So Pell Grant, for all intents and purposes, is an entitlement. So if the student meets the criteria, meaning that they file their FAFSA and that student aid index or that SAI that was the output of that FAFSA, that's what's going to determine, in most cases, their Pell Grant eligibility. And their Pell Grant would be the same if they had a letter from Orono and Husson UNE. The Pell Grant amount's going to be the same at all of those schools because it's basically funded directly from the federal government and just runs through the school. That's very different than Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which we call SEOG. That is where the schools themselves, the financial aid office themselves, apply. There's a formula for those sorts of funds. So at UMaine, for example, UMaine has a pot of SEOG funding. Now, there are rules as to who they can give it to. They still have to give it to students who are very needy, but they have more flexibility about who gets it. So it's not specifically tied to a student's SAI. It has other factors that schools can take into consideration. So schools do have more influence over who they give that funding to, and there's also a finite amount of it. So let's say a school has $2 million of SEOG. They have to be very strategic as to how they're going to spend that $2 million of SEOG, because when it's gone, it's gone. Unlike that Pell Grant, which again, that's more like an entitlement, they just bill the federal government in essence for that money, and they're going to get that Pell Grant money. It's not going to run out. Now, the Congress might have to figure out how to fund it at the highest levels, but from a school's perspective, that money doesn't run out. If a student's eligible for a Pell, they get it, But when it comes to SEOG and work study, those campus-based funds, schools do have a finite amount of that money. And how much a school has varies from one school to the next. And there are schools out there that don't have any SEOG and maybe don't even have any work study. So there are two reasons why you wouldn't see those types of aid on a financial aid offer. The school doesn't have it, or based on the school's policy, the student wasn't eligible. But the Pell Grant, again, is going to look probably be the same amount at every school.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any questions about what we've talked about so far before we move on to some of the tools to help you with talking about this with students? All right. Okay. Beautiful. So, I'm going to introduce you all or reacquaint you all if you've already seen this before. The Comparing Costs and Financial Aid worksheet, offers worksheet that FAME has. This is really great. And having this handy when you're working with a student, is really helpful because let's say the student applies to, three, four, five schools. And you can sit down with them and talk about what is the cost for each one, because it's really going to vary wildly based on how much how much funds the school has to, provide to each student. Like we talked about those three schools that are well endowed and able to provide 100% of need to students. And then some schools can't. And, there might be schools that have the SEOG funds and some don't. So all of this is going to be need to be parsed through, and the worksheet helps you do so. So this gives families an apples to apples comparison. And with those three financial aid offers that we showed you, we actually have them listed here out on the worksheet so that you can look at how much compared to one another you might see, even though they might have different ways of communicating that on the financial aid worksheet, you can put it all in the same place here. The total direct loans will typically be about the same for each school, just like that federal Pell Grant, because this is funds that are predetermined, what's available based on the student's SAI and also what's appropriated by the federal government. And so you're going to see that 5,500 number there, same across the board, and you're going to probably see grants are kind of lumped together. The Pell Grant isn't parsed out, but if it was, that would look the same as well. Okay. And so the first side of the worksheet gives us the net price of each school, what's actually broken down as far as aid, and then we're going to talk about how to pay for it. So we really encourage the piecemeal approach to paying for education, looking at how, several different sources to pay for that bill. If you think about a pie, I'm going to borrow Mila's way of describing this, but if you're slicing up a pie at Thanksgiving, you want to keep all the pieces relatively the same, because if you have one very large piece, that's overwhelming. And so, looking at different ways to cover the bill with scholarships. We love scholarships because it's money that you don't have to pay back. So the larger that piece could be, great. But then things like student savings, any additional earnings over the summer, maybe a 529 plan or other types of savings from the parents or relatives. Um, and then after all of that's been depleted, looking at things like monthly payment plans with the schools. Schools are often really accommodating and can work with you to come up with a payment plan so that part or all of that tuition bill is paid up before the fall begins. And then things like tax credits, and lastly, looking at additional loans, whether that's Parent Plus or private student loans. So, just a little bit more on the savings piece here. I have a few examples of what this looks like in reality for families, especially that summer earnings and student savings part. But just a couple examples that are really tangible for students to help them wrap their brain of like, okay, maybe this summer my goal is to get like $2,000 to knock off the bill. Example. So, things like working a summer job and setting aside 20%, at least 20% of their earnings to go towards their bill. Um, and that is the one example I added. So we'll move on. Okay. The reality for many students, again, is that there's still a funding gap once the net price is calculated. And sometimes this can be really anxiety inducing for families. But the good news is that this time of year is really a great time to begin or continue that scholarship search. So if the student can just take a couple hours each week and really dive into that, then, it can really help them in means of paying down the bill. So there are a lot of scholarships out there that are open now and are still accepting applications. Typically, you're going to see like a March 15th or even later deadline for scholarships. And student can really, take now until then to apply for as many as possible. And it's going to be a get what you put in situation. So, um, and then I'll call out here Fame's scholarship search tool. So, at on Fame's website, we have a scholarship search tool. All of the scholarships that we have included are Maine-based scholarships. And so I would never discourage a student from looking at federal scholarships, but of course, you're going to see a larger candidate pool there. So, maybe if the student has a finite amount of time, starting with Maine-based and taking a look at Fame search tool. There, you're also going to see our tracking spreadsheet. So, regardless of if you use the scholarship search tool or not, I'm going to encourage everyone to use the tracking spreadsheet because it's a good way to keep track for yourself how many scholarships the student has applied for, their deadlines, any pieces that they need to put together, and then if they've heard back, because they're going to want to know if they've been awarded scholarships because they're going to need to report that to the school. All right. I'm going to call it the Maine Community Foundation as well. The Maine Community Foundation is another place where students can find really great Maine-based scholarships. And you can look through those and find ones that are specific to their major, some that are just open to anyone, and the really, really great resource there. Next, I'm going to talk about the Worthington Scholarship. So the Worthington Scholarship is a very large scholarship. They award a thousand scholarships per year, which, in perspective, there are every year roughly 13,000 Maine high school seniors. So very, very large scholarship out there in the state of Maine. There are a few requirements to apply and be awarded the Worthington Scholarship. You have to go to one of their school partners, and you can see that on the right-hand side. That's all of those are all colleges that you can find in Maine. And then it has the details here for 2026. Community college gets a certain cap as far as how much funds that the student is awarded versus the four-year college scholarship as well. And then for there's a few differences as far as the eligibility requirements. They for community college they have to have at least a C range or higher in their high school grades. The four-year college, it's a B range, and then there is an SAI requirement as well. And then
Mary,
I'm
can I,
going to call out, yeah,
Mary, could
is a
I
good
just
time
add
to
on
pause
one
and
quick?
answer some questions.
Well, yeah, actually, in the chat, we mostly have just been I've just been sharing some resources. But with the
Okay.
Worthington, one of the things that's really cool about the program is that a student could start at the community college and use their Worthington scholarship there, and it is that 1,500 a semester or 3,000 per year. But then if they transfer to one of the four-year schools here in Maine, they could also take that with them. So that is really unusual to have that sort of a
Mm,
scenario. So I love this scholarship because not only are so many students eligible for it, and they give out so many awards, and they're for students that aren't just your A+ students. The fact that it can
yep.
be used at a variety of schools and they can take it with them, I just think is really unique and special.
Yes. Were there any questions we should go over?
No, we're good. We're good. Yep. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. All right. So let's talk about the Mitchell Scholarship here. So the Mitchell Institute awards about 200 scholarships a year, about at least one to every senior at every high school in Maine. So that's really great. And these funds can be used for out-of-state schools. So and then in addition to the scholarship itself, you also, by it being accepted, you become a Mitchell Scholar, and you also get like, supplementary experiences and education as a being a part of that group. So, and this one is still open as well. So, take a look at that. Its deadline is a little bit sooner, March 1st. So we have a few more weeks until then, but they're definitely still open. Okay, and saving. So who's saving? We definitely want to encourage savings for our families, especially, it can feel too little too late at this point in the year, but it certainly is not. And so being able to save as little or as much as possible is really helpful. You have a good stretch of time before that fall bill is due to put aside as much as you can. NextGenForMe.com is the State of Maine's 529 plan, and they offer really great matching grants available. A 30% match on the what you save every year for main accounts. And so I would encourage any family who is looking at higher education to take advantage of that program, just as like another way to find funds to put towards schooling. And then you should look into if the student has the Alphon grant. There is a select group of students who would have had to opt into the Alphon grant in if their birth years are between 2008 and 2012. They may have the Alphon grant if their parent opened a next gen account within their first year of birth. And so it's worth looking into. It's been several years since that point. The parent might not remember if they opened the next gen account. Fame can help them determine if that's the case. But after that point, in 2013, which is going to be maybe incoming freshmen, maybe eighth grade. Those students, every child born a Maine resident since 2013 automatically gets the Alphon grant. So we're going to be doing a lot more education about that in future years because it's just one more funding source that's going to go towards that tuition bill. So yeah, again, if anyone wants to check if they have the Alphon grant, the Alphon grant's website is great, but also Fame can help with that as well. Great. Okay, so I'm going to transition now and just briefly talk about some student loan stuff and figuring out what is an appropriate amount of student loans that the student should take out because we don't want unlimited student loans. While it can feel like that is a possibility for folks to just pay off that tuition bill, there is repercussions to that, and of course we want students to be aware, families and students to be aware of that before making that choice. So breaking down first the federal loans. Federal loans are direct loans, so they're going to go directly to the student. They are signing up to pay that back after they graduate or after they leave school. And the interest rates are going to change annually, and typically they're going to be available for the following year by early June. So right now, this year for the incoming 2026-27 academic year, the federal direct loans are at 6.39%. And there is flexible repayment options. So there are income driven repayment options with federal student loans. There's some other options, and then also there are some loan forgiveness programs with federal loans. So things like public service loan forgiveness if you work with for an eligible employer for a certain number of years, plus some other requirements, you could get those loans forgiven. And then, beyond those federal loans that the student is eligible for, there is Parent Plus loans. This is a credit-based loan that would be taken out in the parent or guardian's name, and it could be another way to pay the bill if possible and available to those parents. And then it has the interest rate there. And then next is private loans. So private loans are also credit based. It's gonna be based on the debt to income ratio of that family, and there's gonna be a hard credit check on that. And most students are not going to be eligible for private loans on their own because they are, newly adults and they might not have enough credit to actually take out a loan of this nature on their own. So they might need a credit-worthy cosigner. The main loan is a good option for folks if they are eligible for it. You can apply today for a main loan for next year if needed. It is a credit-based loan as well, but it's funded and administered out of the state of Maine. So if that's important to you, then you could look into that. Anything else on student loans, Mila?
No, I think we're good on student loans for the moment, Mary, although something just came in and I'll read it while you maybe will respond to this. We have someone who just messaged directly and asked about the Alphont grant being the same as NextGen. So, Mary, I know you
Okay.
are so well positioned to just kind of go a little bit deeper on that because that is a question we get a lot. So, do you want to take that one for a
Yes.
minute?
Yes, full disclosure, everyone. This is the comparing financial aid offers is a new topic for me. Talking about next gen and the Alphon grant, I could do all day, every day. So I love that question. So the Alphon grant is a program that is funded by a family, the Harold Alphon family, and now Harold Alphon Foundation, because the other folks are a part of their board. That is funded by this private entity. And so they have their own, limitations, guidelines on how they have decided to give away this grant. It is not a scholarship because it's automatically awarded. But the way that the program works, again, we're going to take the like 2008, 2012 bucket and set it over here. But the universal Alphon grantees are every baby born a Maine resident since 2013. So I'll use myself as an example. I have a son. I have a 6 month old. And when he was born, I filled out a card in the hospital and he got the Alphon grant. You don't have to fill out the card in the hospital, but you have a baby in Maine who's a Maine resident, you get the Alphon grant. So we got a letter in the mail that said, your son has an Alphon grant. Maybe consider saving alongside that. One of the ways to do that is to open a NextGen 529 account. And so anyone can open a NextGen account. You do not have to have the Alphon grant to have NextGen be available to you. And you also don't have to have an Alphon grant to be eligible for the other matching grants. So that 30% match I mentioned, available to all main NextGen accounts. So those folks, I'm thinking right now, those juniors and seniors that don't have the Alphon grant, still use NextGen to get that 30% match by all means, and some of the other grants that are available. But I totally understand the question about these two programs. Are they the same or how are they different? I always explain it as NextGen 529 is a program that's like for anyone. In fact, we have many people that are not affiliated with Maine at all that use it. And then the Alphon grant is a bonus that certain people are eligible for. Um, and so if there's any additional questions on that, I direct folks to nextgenforme.com, but I'm also more than happy to talk with someone directly at a later date about that. But I think, is there any other questions I can answer about that before I move on?
No, Mary, that was perfect. Thank you. I knew you
Cool.
had that one completely covered. I
Yeah,
will say someone.
you can tell which parts I'm well versed in, which I'm not.
Well, yeah, Mary can talk about
Okay.
those things all day. There are other things I could talk about all day. So together, it's a
Yeah.
great team. One of the
Yeah.
questions that did come up was about loan forgiveness. And so someone asked about loan forgiveness. So I just wanted to briefly say that, students want to assume that they're going to have to repay their loans, but there are some circumstances under which federal student loans can be forgiven. One that's existed for a long time is that teachers, there is a forgiveness
Mhm.
program for teachers. But I think the
Yeah.
one that people are most familiar with these days is something called public service loan forgiveness. So, public service loan forgiveness is when you go into repayment if you're working for an eligible employer. And an eligible employer is someone when you work for in public service for a public organization. Think the state of Maine, think your local state government, think the University of Maine system, Maine Community College system. All of those are jobs that would be eligible, as well as 401k, nonprofit organizations. So, like I live in Bangor, Eastern Maine Medical Center is a 401k. Anyone who works for those employers can potentially have their loan forgiven because it's based on who your employer is, not what your job is. Can potentially have their loans forgiven after they make 120 payments, so basically 10 years worth of payments at their income-based level. So you will apply for an income-based repayment plan. They'll calculate what your payment is based on your income. Often that's lower. And then after you make those payments for 10 years, it does not have to be consecutive months, but a total of 120 months, your loans are potentially eligible to be forgiven. So that's the biggest of all of the forgiveness programs. And aside from teachers, it's really the only active forgiveness program that exists these days.
Yep. Yep. Great. All right. So just a little bit more on student loan borrowing really quick. So, when working with students and talking about, taking out additional loans to pay that tuition bill, it's really important to talk about the repercussions of that. It can feel like, a really abstract concept for students on borrowing this money and what exactly that means for them. So a good rule of thumb is do not borrow more than what you expect to make in the first year's salary because any more than that will likely become unmanageable for the student and their finances. And so, we have a really great calculator tool where you can put in the expected salary of what, let's say, the student's going to go into, social work. How much does a social worker make their first year out of college? And then it gives you a number to a reasonable amount of student loans that they should not exceed in borrowing. And so for this one, for there's a salary of $52,000 a year. The student should try to stay under $31,000 in student loans, which is probably about how much like accumulative the federal student loans would be for 4 years of school. And so on the other side of that, what salary would I need to support this debt if the student wants to, go to school for a major that might be difficult to find work after or a high paying job after, and it costs them $50,000 to complete that program, they're going to want to know that their monthly payment, if $50,000 worth of borrowing, is going to be around, you know, $555 a month and how much of a salary that would be necessary to support that payment. And this is really eye-opening for students, taking a look at that and figuring out do the numbers make sense for them? And, this is where things like, maybe a safety school is the way to go for the first couple of years, or going back to the drawing board, taking some time beefing up those savings or the other options such as that. So we'll call out here Career One Stop is has a salary finder tool. So if you're working with a student and you don't know what number to put in for a certain career they're looking at, the Career One Stop salary finder is a good place to start to find that. Great. Okay, so that's that on student loans. We have about 7 minutes left. We're going to talk about appeals and then we're going to jump into some questions. Let's see here. So, when you file the FAFSA will actually pull funds from two prior years from your federal taxes or your state taxes. So, a lot can change in 2 years, and if the circumstances have changed for that family, they might be a good candidate for putting in an appeal to get their SAI changed, and then of course their financial aid award may change. So some reasons that you might apply for an appeal is loss of income or employment. So if the family, one of the contributors loses their job, then they might be eligible for an appeal. A divorce or separation would make a family eligible for an appeal. Unusual medical expenses. So if something comes up and there's an illness in the family that's taking away from a lot of the family finances because they have to travel for treatments or they're paying medical premiums, that could be a reason. And then lastly, there is multiple family members attending college. So this is one that we have seen perhaps a little bit more squishy this year. So there are some schools that are using this as a circumstance for appeal, some that are saying that it is not. So that's going to be one that you're going to want to check with the individual school to make sure that they would actually take that into account. But let's say you want to go forward and ask to have an appeal. Even if you don't see your student or your circumstance on this list, it's not going to hurt you to apply for an appeal. We are at a point in the year where schools are handing out financial aid awards and students are declining them because they're going to other institutions or they're not going, they're choosing not to go to that school for one reason or another. And it does not hurt to reach out to the school and say, hey, I got this award and this net price from this school, but I really want to go to your school. And, is there any additional aid that could be awarded to help me get there? There may very well maybe, and so it's worth an ask. And the worst thing that the student could have happened is the school says no, and that's okay. So we have some help here for you guys if you are helping a student or if the student wants to apply for an appeal and gives you some tips on how to do that and how to go about starting that conversation with the financial aid office. All right, now is a great time to wrap it up with some questions here.
I don't see any questions that we haven't addressed yet, Mary. I think someone
Okay.
just did comment about the calculator, though. And I think that if Mary and I had our druthers, we would have every student before they started borrowing use that calculator just to get a good sense of, we know things change, but a good sense of whether their borrowing was going to contribute to them being successful not only in school, letting them go to a school and get that degree, but afterwards. What was that going to mean afterwards? Because unfortunately, we do see students sometimes who, after the fact, are like, "Well, nobody told me. I didn't understand what that was going to mean for me, and now I can't, maybe live the type of life I want to." So we would love to have you share that calculator far and wide with your students as you're working with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mary,
Well, while
what
we
was it?
have, oh,
No, go ahead.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, while we have everyone here for just a few more minutes, there's a few other things I want to share. Um, in particular, I want to call out the Path to Affording Higher Education handout. This is a great thing to share with families. Talks about the piecemeal approach to paying for higher education and how it fits into the financial plan. A few other things to consider is a lot of families are very hyper focused on paying this year's tuition bill, right? What can we do to get us through the first year? And sometimes that can really, and in fact, I've spoken with families already this year where that kind of comes back around to bite them in the butt. And so, they've taken out loans, they've exhausted their options. They took out the main loan, for example, their debt to income ratio is higher. So when it comes back to applying for things like the credit-based aid, they might not be eligible for it the second time around. And so when you're making these decisions, it has to be a holistic picture of, what's the second, third, fourth year going to look like? And because you don't want to be, we never want students in a scenario where they've taken out loans, they've done their first year of school, and then they're kind of stuck after that. Um, again, going back to what about a safety school, right? So I've heard Mila use her personal life example of her son going to maybe not his first choice school his first year, but then getting really great merit-based scholarships the next year because he was a great student that first year. So, there's nothing saying that the student can't go to a more affordable school at first. And then as things change and they apply for more scholarships or they just, because they saved a little on the front end, they maybe can go to a more desired, more expensive school after. Um, and that is what I have. I will just have Mila add any of her thoughts or any last questions we have.
Yeah, great job, Mary. That was wonderful. And we're getting comments about how much they appreciate all of the information that you've shared. The last thing I would just mention is we do have an upcoming session on February 26th at 6 o'clock in the evening. It's very similar to this. It's just structured for parents and students specifically. We know you're working with a whole bunch of different students, so we try to go into a little bit more detail about the various scenarios, but we'd love to have them join us. So I put the link in the chat. But you can also always go to famemaine.com/events to see our upcoming events. And we'd love to have you share those links with your students and families. So thank you all very much. And the slides are going to be
Yes.
sent. That was the other question too, Mary. The slides will
Oh,
be sent
yes, we'll
along with
send the
the recording.
slides.
Yeah.
The very last thing I'll share before we say goodbye is I'm going to call out our Education Affordability 101 on April 2nd. You should, if you are a financial aid or school counselor professional, you probably have already heard from us and gotten the save the date in your inbox. And you should know that Education Affordability 101 or EA 101 is the new and improved FA 101. So if you were looking for that and you're looking forward to that every year, we want you there. We're excited to, give this long-standing event, some new improvements and make it really great and special for everyone. And so keep an eye out for that April 2nd. So, okay, this is going to conclude our presentation, but thank you all for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.